As I write this in August and September of 2025, classical music is at an interesting place. In one sense, it is thriving. Lots of people go into classical music, either as a hobby or as a full fledged career. Lots of people are supporting young artists who compose, play, or record classical music, and lots of people dream of one day teaching an instrument as a professor at a university. However, on the other hand, there are many people who see classical music as such a high, developed, and sophisticated form of art that it loses something. It loses meaning, it loses accessibility, it loses its touch, it loses relevance. Some organizations and schools love to promote what they see as the upholding of tradition by staging the same old symphonies and operas to the same old audiences who wear the same old clothes to have the same old charming experience on the conveyor belt of sensation. In some ways, we owe a great debt of gratitude to universities and conservatories because they sustain classical music and its history, passing it on to the younger generation. But in other ways, I feel that they are responsible for a certain elitism. In order to receive additional funding and to maintain their high status as respected professors and producers of art, they have to present classical music in a sort of glass case, something to be admired from afar but never tampered with. In more than a few ways, the university has ground music up into predictable styles and tropes, things that are overly consistent and easy to grade. If you play Mozart heavy, they tell you that's not quite the style. If you play Bach with rich vibrato, they say Bach wouldn't like that. Yes, there is a healthy and thriving new music scene, but to many, studying classical music is about recreating and preserving history, rather than creating expressive art, all for the purpose of perpetuating pro university propaganda. For this video, I'll have to explain two very important words: historicism and presentism. When talking about art, the word historicism refers to the practice of situating art within its historical context and reenacting it as accurately as possible. The word presentism is the view that the only thing history is good for is that it leads up to whatever is going on in the present. While it is not a total dismissal of a given historical context, it certainly diminishes the significance of the past by giving it the back seat of the big picture agenda of art. To give an example of historicism, we might take a look at early music departments of universities. The performers study countless hours the music they are playing, the way in which it was performed, and how they apply that technique to their instruments. To a certain extent, all musicians at a university do this, even if not in the early music department. When you play Mozart, professors expect a certain style to go with it. But this can be damaging, and I'll explain why shortly. First, let me give an example of presentism. Presentism is not something we see from professors in the universities too often. The only place you might find this would be young composers studying new music. While there is a strong respect for new, current, and relevant music, there aren't lots of people who abandon or entirely dismiss old composers like Beethoven and Mahler, viewing them as now irrelevant. An interesting combination of the two views can be found on the opera stage. If you were to see a staged opera these days, chances are the singers would be wearing modern clothing, but singing the old notes written by the composers. I don't think this is just a way to spice up an already familiar opera like Marriage of Figaro, but I think it is an effort to make it more relevant, relatable, and accessible to the audience. I might call this neo-presentism, adjusting classic music, making it understood as the first audience might have understood it. When playing any old music, you have to consider two things. One, how it was performed during its day, and two, how it was understood during its day, or the intended emotional response of the audience. The second is usually dismissed. For instance, when a student plays a Mozart violin concerto, they learn the notes and the bowings, then the nuances and the subtleties of the era. For example, always playing elegantly, never too heavy or violent, because that's the way Mozart would have it played in his day. All of a sudden, the student is employing 18th century understandings to express 18th century art to a 21st century audience, in today's case. 2.5 centuries is a massive gap between artist and audience. I believe that this is where classical music has lost its relevance, in its insistence upon the old ways perpetuated by the university. It makes you wonder if a given style is really fitting to a given composer, or if it was simply assigned by institutions like universities to provide a standard to which their students must subscribe. Think about it. In literature, there are two ways to translate a book: formal and functional. Formal translations are those which prioritize the form of the original language, such as its words and sentence structure, to retain a literal rendering. And functional translations are those which prioritize the function or meaning of the original text to create the same effect on a given target audience. There are lots of sayings unique to one language which cannot be translated exactly. For instance, in English, we have lots of sayings like spill the beans, which means to reveal sensitive information. If we were translating that into a different language, let's say Russian, they might not have the exact saying of spill the beans. So we would have to employ functional translation and say it in a way which a Russian speaking person would understand. The same process could work as a neo-presentist approach in music. In the Gigue of Bach's Third Cello Suite, there's a part with considerable dissonance, which includes the notes C, D, and E flat, as well as eventually C sharp, being played over the low D. Even though this might not sound dissonant to our ears today, which are accustomed to music by composers like Stockhausen, Krum, or Penderecki, it was likely quite jarring for Bach's 18th century audience. So, as a proper neo presentist musician today, you'd use functional translation and play it in a jarring way to give your target audience a jarring experience. This might mean playing with an ugly sound, or violent vibrato, or anything you can dream up, but the effect would be totally lost if you simply play it as it was played back in Bach's day. Lots of people present the concept of a strict style as a way to honor the composer and his or her work, but I find that it actually has the opposite outcome. So, should we dismiss all the markings and directions composers have given us in their music? No, not at all. We must use the markings and directions to decipher the intended effect of the music. As a composer, when I write a piece, my priority is to affect the audience or to evoke something. In order to achieve this, older music might need to be adjusted to create that effect on a given target audience. Merely reenacting a composer's music is not enough to express something. I'd like to finish with one quick thought. It seems to me that at the heart of this debate lies one dividing question, and that is who or what are we making music for? Obviously, you don't need to go far to see that there can be incredible diversity in answering this question. But when I play music, in the most general of terms, I aim to evoke. I must first decipher what I believe to be what the piece of music is trying to evoke. To do this, I need to have a healthy knowledge of the style of the era of its composition. Then I must take certain measures in my execution of that piece for it to evoke, which may include abandoning performance practices of the era of its composition. In this case, I am making music for the audience, my audience, because I believe that Bach's music or Mozart's music or whoever's music deserves to be preserved and understood. It shouldn't be kept as an 18th century European cultural experience, but as a human experience. We are the culture, and music is for everyone.